Welcome to Halfway Dark.
The job ad was a godsend. Night security at a self-storage facility. Easy money, right? Sit in a booth, watch some monitors, do a few rounds. The pay was surprisingly good, which should have been my first red flag. My name's Leo, by the way. And this is the story of my first and last night at Lockett Wright Storage. The place was a maze of corrugated steel and rolling doors, stretching out under the sickly orange glow of the security lights. The air was still and cold, carrying the faint, musty smell of forgotten things. My boss, a tired-looking man named Frank, gave me the grand tour. It was quick. Here's the office. Here are the keys. Here's the panic button. Don't press it unless you're dying. The cameras cover most of the main aisles, but not all of them. Do a full patrol at midnight and 3 a.m. Any questions? I shook my head, eager to start my quiet, lucrative shift. He just grunted and said, "Just keep your wits about you. Some of the tenants are a bit odd." The first few hours were exactly what I expected. Blissful, uninterrupted silence. I leaned back in the creaky office chair, scrolling through my phone, the bank of monitors showing empty, silent corridors. The only sound was the hum of the old computer and the occasional buzz of a moth hitting the window. At 11:30 p.m., I decided to get the first patrol out of the way a little early. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight and the ring of keys that felt like they could unlock a medieval castle. Stepping out of the office, the silence felt different, heavier. The long corridors seemed to stretch on forever, the metal walls amplifying the sound of my own footsteps. I started my patrol in Building A, sweeping the beam of my flashlight across the rows of identical red doors. A1, A2, A3, everything was secure. It was almost boring, and I started to feel a little silly for the unease creeping up my spine. This was easy. Then I got to Building C. It was at the far end of the property, furthest from the office and the main gate. The air here felt colder, stagnant. As I walked down the main aisle, I heard something, a faint, rhythmic tapping. I stopped, straining my ears. Tap, tap. It was coming from somewhere deep inside the building, a steady, deliberate sound that broke the oppressive silence. My heart started to pound. Frank's words about odd tenants echoed in my mind. Maybe someone was inside their unit, working on a late-night project. It was against the rules, but not exactly terrifying. I followed the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. It led me to a corner unit, C47. The tapping was louder here, coming directly from behind the metal door. Tap, tap, tap. I hesitated, then knocked on the door. "Hello, Lockett Wright Security. The facility is closed. You need to leave the premises." The tapping stopped. Silence. A long, drawn-out silence that was somehow more unnerving than the noise. I waited, my breath held tight in my chest. Nothing? "Hello?" I called out again, my voice sounding weak in the vast, empty building. Still nothing. I decided to just make a note of it in the log. Probably nothing. As I turned to leave, I heard a new sound. A soft, wet scraping from inside C47. It sounded like something heavy and damp being dragged across a concrete floor. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't a tenant working on a project. I backed away slowly, my eyes glued to the door, and got out of Building C as fast as I could without actually running. Back in the relative safety of the office, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I stared at the monitor for Building C, but the camera only covered the main entrance, not the aisle with C47. The corridor on the screen was empty, still, and silent. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that the strange acoustics of the place were playing tricks on me. But the memory of that wet, dragging sound was impossible to ignore. Around 1 a.m., a notification popped up on the monitor. Motion detected at the front gate. I zoomed in. A beat-up sedan was parked just outside, its headlights off. Nobody got out. The car just sat there, a dark shape in the grainy night vision feed. It wasn't a tenant the gate code hadn't been used. It was just there, watching. I felt a prickle of fear. Was this connected to the noise in C-47? I watched the car for a solid 20 minutes. It didn't move. The doors didn't open. I couldn't see anyone inside. My shift protocols were clear. Call the police for any suspicious vehicles loitering after hours. My hand hovered over the phone, but I hesitated. What if it was just someone who pulled over to make a call or take a nap? I'd look like a fool. I decided to wait. My attention was pulled away from the gate by a flicker on another monitor. It was Building B this time. The camera feed for the main aisle was glitching, stuttering between a clear image and a screen full of static. I'd seen this before with old systems. But then, in the split second before the feed went completely black, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing at the far end of the hall. The monitor went dead. Just a black screen with the words nitrogen monoxide signal. My blood ran cold. It had been there for just a frame, a fleeting image, but it was burned into my mind. It was hunched over, with arms that seemed too long for its body. I tried to reset the feed, rebooting the system, my hands shaking. Nothing. The camera in Building B was gone. I was officially terrified. A strange noise and a dragging sound from a locked unit, a mysterious car watching the gate, and now a figure on a camera that immediately died. This wasn't a normal security gig. This was something else. I grabbed the phone to call Frank, but then I stopped. What would I say? That I thought I saw a ghost on a fuzzy camera? He'd think I was crazy. Then the phone on the desk rang, the landline. The sudden, shrill sound made me jump out of my skin. The caller ID was just a string of zeros. My hand trembled as I picked it up. Lock-it right storage? Leo speaking. Silence. I could hear faint breathing on the other end, shallow and ragged. Hello, who is this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. A voice finally came through the line, but it wasn't human. It was a distorted, gurgling sound, like someone trying to speak underwater. It whispered a single word, a word that made my stomach drop. Hungry. Then a click and the line went dead. I slammed the phone down, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hungry. What did that mean? I had to do the 3 a.m. patrol. It was part of the job, and if I didn't, Frank would know I'd bailed. I didn't want to lose the best-paying job I'd ever had. Armed with my flashlight and a newfound sense of sheer terror, I forced myself out of the office. The car at the front gate was gone. I don't know if that made me feel better or worse. This time, I started with Building B, where the camera had died. I had to know what was in there. The building was silent as I entered, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the darkness. I walked slowly, checking every corner, my ears straining for any sound. The aisle was empty. There was no sign of the thin, tall figure I had seen on the monitor. I made my way to the back of the building, near where I'd seen the figure. Everything seemed normal, but then my light fell upon a dark, wet trail on the concrete floor. It started from nowhere and led to a single unit B-13. The trail looked oily, and it smelled faintly of rust and decay. My dread returned tenfold. This was the same kind of trail I imagined from the dragging sound in Building C. Then I saw the door to B-13. It was slightly ajar. A thick, dark liquid was seeping from the gap at the bottom, pooling on the floor. That was impossible. All the units were secured with heavy-duty padlocks, and I had the only master key for the facility's own locks. A tenant's lock was still on it, a big brass one, but the door was definitely open. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door. It swung open with a low groan, the smell hitting me like a physical blow. It was a coppery, rotting stench that made me gag. I shone my flashlight inside. The unit was empty, completely bare, except for the walls. They were covered in scratches, deep gouges in the metal, as if a large animal had been trapped inside, trying to claw its way out. And in the center of the floor was the source of the smell, a large, dark, sticky puddle. Suddenly, all the lights in the building went out. I was plunged into absolute darkness, broken only by the weak beam of my flashlight. The emergency backup generator should have kicked in. It didn't. Then I heard it, the soft, wet scraping sound. But it wasn't coming from the unit. It was coming from the end of the aisle, behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam shaking wildly. The thin man was there, standing at the entrance to the building, silhouetted against the dim orange light from outside. It was just as I'd seen on the camera. Tall, gaunt, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. It took a slow, shambling step towards me, its head cocked to one side. A low, gurgling sound rumbled from its chest, the same sound I heard on the phone. I didn't think, I just ran. I sprinted down the side aisle, fumbling for a side exit I remembered seeing on the map. I could hear it behind me, its footsteps a horrifying mix of a shuffle and a wet slap against the concrete. It was faster than it looked. I burst through the emergency exit into the night air, gasping for breath, and ran straight for the office. I had to hit the panic button. I slammed the office door shut and threw the deadbolt. My hands shook so badly, it took me 3 tries to hit the big red panic button on the wall. I held it down, praying it was connected, praying someone would come. As I stared at the monitors, one by one, they flickered and died, building then the gate cameras, all going black, until only one was left, the camera right outside the office door, and it was standing there, staring right at the lens. Its face was a pale, featureless blur, except for a wide, dark slash of a mouth, open in a silent scream. I'm still in here. The police never came. The sun is coming up, but the power is still out, and it's still waiting outside my door. I can hear it scratching, tapping, waiting. Please send help. I've been a nighttime delivery driver for about a year now. It's quiet work, mostly peaceful. Just me, the hum of the van, and endless miles of dark, sleeping streets. The city transforms at night. Familiar roads become strange, and the silence can feel heavy, but I liked it. It paid the bills, and I'm not much of a people person anyway, until last Tuesday. That's when I got the package. It was just another shift, or so I thought. I was grabbing my last few deliveries from the warehouse depot. The air was cold, smelling of rain and exhaust fumes. Most of the packages were standard stuffed brown boxes, padded envelopes, but one stood out. It was a small, cube-shaped box, wrapped in plain black paper that seemed to absorb the light around it. It felt strangely cold to the touch. I checked the label. The address was what really got me. 13 Ravenwood Lane. I knew my routes like the back of my hand. I've driven every street in this town, at every hour of the night. There is no Ravenwood Lane. I pulled out my phone, checked the company app, then Google Maps, then every map service I could think of. Nothing. The street simply didn't exist. I asked my supervisor, a gruff guy named Dave, who's seen it all. He just glanced at it, shrugged, and said, "System says it's a valid address. GPS should take you there. Just deliver it, kid. Last one for the night." His casual dismissal was more unnerving than if he'd been concerned. It felt like I was the only one who saw something wrong with this. So I loaded it into the van. The black box sat on the passenger seat next to me, a silent, dark passenger. As I drove out of the depot, the van's GPS flickered to life with the route. To my surprise, it displayed a clear path to 13 Ravenwood Lane. The map showed a small, Dead-end street branching off Old Miller Road, a place I'd driven past 100 times. Following the GPS felt surreal. It was guiding me down familiar highways, then onto darker, less traveled back roads. The streetlights grew sparse, and soon the world outside my windshield was just a tunnel of headlight beams cutting through inky blackness. A thick fog started to roll in, clinging to the road and muffling the sound of my engine. The GPS voice, usually a calm and reassuring presence, announced, "Turn right onto Ravenwood Lane." I slowed the van. There was no road sign, just a narrow, unpaved opening between two ancient, gnarled oak trees. It looked more like a forgotten trail than a residential street. Hesitantly, I turned the wheel, the tires crunching on gravel and loose earth. The lane was short, maybe 100 yards long, and lined with dense, overgrown woods. The trees formed a canopy overhead, blocking out the faint glow of the city sky. At the end of the lane stood a single house. It was a tall, skeletal Victorian, its paint peeling and its windows dark and empty like vacant eyes. A crooked number 13 was nailed to the door. I parked the van, the engine's rumble dying into an oppressive silence. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart. I grabbed the package and a flashlight. The air outside was frigid, carrying the smell of damp earth and decay. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in the van and drive away, but Dave's voice echoed in my head. Just deliver it. Walking up the cracked stone path felt like wading through molasses. The house loomed over me, seeming to watch my every step. The front porch steps groaned under my weight. There was no doorbell, just a heavy iron knocker, shaped like a crow. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the cold metal. My breath plumed in the air. I took a deep breath and lifted the knocker. The sound echoed, loud and final in the dead quiet of the night. I waited. Nothing. No lights flickered on inside, no sound of movement. I knocked again, harder this time. The silence that answered was deeper, more absolute than before. It felt like the house was holding its breath. Company policy is clear. If no one answers, leave a notice and return the package to the depot. That's what I should have done. But something about that black box in my hand, it felt important. I felt a strange compulsion to see the delivery through. I decided to try the back. Maybe there was a light on, or a dog, or any sign of life. I circled the house, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the darkness. The backyard was a mess of tangled weeds and skeletal bushes. There were no lights on. The back door was shut tight. It was then that I noticed a faint, flickering light in one of the upstairs windows. A pale, bluish glow, like a television left on in an empty room. Someone was home. Why weren't they answering the door? Annoyance began to mix with my fear. I went back to the front porch, determined to get a response this time. I pounded on the door with my fist, yelling, "Delivery! I have a package for this address." My voice sounded small and weak against the silent facade of the house. Suddenly, I heard a sound from inside. A faint scratching, like fingernails dragging across a wooden floor. It started, then stopped. Then it started again, closer this time. It was a slow, deliberate sound, crawling towards the door. My blood ran cold. I backed away from the door, my hand tightening on my flashlight. The scratching stopped right behind the door. An eternity seemed to pass in the heavy silence. Then, with a slow, agonizing creak, the doorknob began to turn. It wasn't a quick twist, but a shaky, unsteady rotation, as if being turned by a hand that was weak or old, or not quite human. I was completely frozen. The door swung open a few inches, revealing a sliver of absolute darkness inside. No hall light, no furniture, just a void. A smell wafted out stale, musty air, like a place that had been sealed for 100 years. I couldn't see anyone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "I have a package." A hand emerged from the darkness. It was pale and skeletal, with long yellowed fingernails that looked unnaturally sharp. It didn't reach for the package. It just hung there in the opening, fingers slightly curled, beckoning me closer. I could not see a body, an arm, or a face. Just the hand, disembodied in the blackness. I stumbled backward off the porch, my heart hammering against my ribs. I dropped the package on the ground, the sound of it thudding onto the damp earth startlingly loud. I didn't care about the delivery anymore. I didn't care about my job. All I wanted was to get away from that house, from that hand. I scrambled back to the van, fumbling for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed the van into reverse, not even looking back, tires spinning in the gravel. I just needed to get away. As I sped away, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The front door of the house was wide open now. Standing in the doorway was a tall, shadowy figure, impossibly thin, its form barely distinguishable from the darkness behind it. I couldn't see a face, but I could feel its gaze on me, cold and ancient. I floored the accelerator, my van fishtailing as I hit the main road. I didn't stop driving until I was back at the depot, the first hints of dawn streaking the sky. I burst into the office, babbling my story to a half-asleep Dave. He just stared at me, then looked up the address on his computer. He turned the screen towards me. "Kid," he said, "look, there's no delivery for any Ravenwood Lane in the system. Never was." On his screen, my route for the night was displayed. It showed all my deliveries, completed. The last one was on a normal street, miles away from Old Miller Road. There was no record of the black box, no record of 13 Ravenwood Lane. It was as if it had never happened, as if my entire night had been a hallucination. I quit that day. I couldn't go back. I couldn't stand the thought of being out on those dark roads alone. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I feel a chill run down my spine. I think about that black box and the house that shouldn't exist. I think about that pale, beckoning hand and the scratching sound behind the door. And some nights, I swear I see it in my rearview mirror. A tall, slender shadow standing at the edge of the road watching me. I don't know what was in that box or what that thing in the house wanted. And I hope I never find out. Some doors are best left unopened, and some addresses are best left unfound. Thank you for listening.